Hello. Once again, we are joined by behaviorist and historian Lori Hansen. Lori, thank you so very much for joining us once again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, Lori, we are hearing repeated claims from the administration that people in Minnesota are wrong for exercising constitutional rights, protesting, carrying firearms, reporting, refusing service, or even worshiping without interference. From a historical and constitutional standpoint, can the government decide when exercising a right is wrong?
Well, historically, there have been attempts. There's been the sedition acts, and there's been Fourth Amendment restrictions, on seizure. They came up with the reasonableness doctrine, but there's always been strict judicial oversight of that. And the sedition acts were found to be unconstitutional. They were used in the 1700s, then again in the early 1900s, and then it was also used during the civil rights movements,
Hmm.
as you might imagine. But the courts have always cited that that was an unconstitutional use. So, yes, historically, the government has tried to limit constitutional rights, but the courts have been pretty good at uh, holding the government to account. We do have speech exceptions, like you can't yell fire in a movie theater. Um, you can regulate when protests can happen, things like that. But in prisons, schools, and the military, you have strict control. There isn't a free speech per se right in those settings. So, but very, very limited. And this is definitely not one of those cases. So this will be a good test. See if the courts hold.
So the administration has said Alex Preddy and Renee Good were wrong to protest and that journalists were wrong to report on a protest inside a church. At the same time, you have Valentina Gomez
Mhm.
disrupting an LGBTQ plus church service by yelling scripture, and she wasn't arrested. How does the First Amendment actually apply here, and why does enforcement appear uneven?
Well, the enforcement is uneven is because one side it plays fast and loose with the Constitution. They decide they're the arbiters of what's right and what's wrong, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and that's the precursor to fascism. Um, as far as protesting in churches, you kind of then have a conflict within the Bill of Rights, right? Free speech versus right religious expression. So it is a quandary, but the contradiction of the two is telling. What Valentina Gomez did was, to me, was tantamount to a hate crime.
Hmm.
She was slurring, threatening, making threats. It was pretty outrageous. And then she's
Hmm.
also done similar things with mosques, burning a Quran. Uh, so she's done some pretty hateful, awful things, and it's pretty telling that the administration's like, not a problem. Yeah.
Right.
So it's selective for a purpose. It's meant to constrict free speech among the dissidents, quote unquote. Yeah.
Right. And, just to piggyback on that, it was just amazing how in the same video she was talking about buying a mosque in her area
Yeah.
and tearing them down. And wouldn't that go against just freedom of religion right there? So
It
it's horrible.
it's definitely puts a boot to the neck of freedom of religion.
Mhm.
It's we're moving closer and closer to a one religious religion state, and that religion will be decided by who has the political power.
Mm.
I mean, we're really, if the courts don't step in and, well, it's really a matter of the Congress, but they've become impotent. So there, Congress is the one who's really supposed to rein in the
Mm.
executive branch, and then the courts too. But if Congress fails to do so, it's really hard for the courts to do it
Mm.
on their own. Um, so yeah, we're in quite a mess.
Historically, when governments begin labeling protests and reporting as disruptive or dangerous, what usually follows?
Well, I mean, it's not an isolated thing. It's a well constructed plan. It, to silence your critics. It's happened throughout history. I mean, I know people are tired of hearing it, but until they start paying attention, what more can you do but say it? Very similar to Nazi Germany. You start labeling these people as dangerous, and you give a inflammatory, thugs, dissidents, enemies of the state, all those kinds of things. It's meant to narrow democratic rights. It's intentional. It isn't by mistake. It isn't just things spiraling out of control. It's very much a designed plan, and it doesn't bode well. And the media going along with it is also disturbing. The media basically adopts their rhetoric, and calls them dissidents, calls them agitators, and that's not helpful. And that's actually just feeding right into the problem. So, yeah.
President Trump and his administration argued that Alex Preddy was wrong to carry a firearm at a protest, despite open carry being legal. Can the government retroactively criminalize lawful gun ownership based on context or political optics?
No, I mean, the short answer is no. The United States has been very clear about what's called post de facto laws. You can't make something a crime that wasn't a crime when you did it. You can't
Mm.
go back and make something retroactively criminal. So, no, they can't do that. Will they try to do that? Who knows? And the big test will be, will the courts strike it down? And that's what I think we're all on pins and needles, is if the courts will hold. Because I'm just
Mm.
reminded of a funny little anecdote about that. I mean, King Henry VIII, in order to execute his fifth wife, passed a bunch of post de facto laws and that she was guilty of. So then it was crimes against the king, and then she was, of course, beheaded. But yeah, no, they're used for very dull. Making laws retroactive are used for very, very diabolical purposes. So the United States, that was a fundamental principle, probably based on what the abuses um, from the monarchy, and they said absolutely no, and we've never done that. So if it starts happening, that's a huge red flag. Huge red flag.
Mm. We've seen federal agents asserting authority to enter homes and penalize businesses for refusing service. Historically, what happens when the Fourth Amendment is treated as optional during enforcement operations?
Well, you once again, it's just it happens in countries that are on the path to authoritarianism. It's just another sign that we're headed down the road of a fascist state. So as you see, ICE is using warrantless searches. They're doing administrative search warrants that have no basis in law. There isn't a neutral arbitrator who has reviewed the facts. They're just writing them out and signing them off right there and then, and that's very disturbing. And there's that 100-mile. The courts have given them some latitude and said 100 miles within the border they can use more extreme enforcement rights. But now they're taking that and moving it everywhere.
Mm.
And the courts, the lawsuit against Nome. I was I was very concerned that they are going to let them continue doing whatever the hell it is they're doing until the court decides if it's legal or not legal. To me, that's very disturbing. If there's even a hint that this is illegal, it should have been stayed and stopped until the courts could decide. Um, so to me, even though the courts have not signaled that they're going to rule in Noam's favor, it's still appalling that they'll get to continue doing all this stuff. And if it is deemed illegal, then what? What's the recourse then? So, yeah, that's going to be a wait and see case that I hope gets expedited. But yeah, no, it's loss of oversight. Um, they use very deceptive tactics, like they're pretending to be local law enforcement, they're pretending to be all these different people, which seems to violate the spirit of the Fourth Amendment. Um, and the abuse of exigent circumstances, that's always been, you can not have a warrant if there's exigent circumstances, and that's usually been to save a life. That's usually what the exigent circumstance is. It isn't just for, oh, I don't know, I thought there was someone who's here illegally in the house. It's not an
Mm,
exigent circumstance,
mhm,
that the courts have ever sided with, I should
mhm,
say. But yeah, so you're going to see more and more of those abuses. And now that the courts won't even stay what could possibly be an illegal action is alarming.
mhm,
So, but yeah, no, it's not great. It's
mhm,
a big assault on the Fourth Amendment.
mhm. When people are arrested, threatened, or killed before investigations are complete, and officials publicly justify those actions, what does that say about due process?
Well, it's such an assault on the Bill of Rights. I mean, that's always been our calling card, basically, that we have this system of justice where people have their day in court, that they're innocent until found guilty. They have all these protections, and then who has this arbitrary power to carry out extrajudicial, extra legal things? There's no one who's embedded with that authority for a very good reason. We don't believe in that. And it just undermines the rule of law. I mean, when people can, law enforcement and whoever can just decide, I'm going to kill you because I think you're guilty. That totally erodes our system of justice. And if people who are sitting on the sidelines thinking, oh, this doesn't impact me, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. Once you
Mhm,
erode the rule of law, there's no stopping it. And it will spill over into everyone's lives. So it's a big deal. And it just means that our democracy is failing and we're headed down the path to totalitarianism.
mhm. Well, looking at all of this together, protests, guns, press, religion, businesses, homes, does this represent isolated incidences, or a broader pattern in how power is being exercised?
I think it's by design, and I think it's a larger issue. I don't think it's isolated, um, in the sense that, I mean, I guess you could say it's isolated because it's just being used right now against people here illegally and those who are protesting. So you could say in that sense it's isolated, but I think it's very much by design, and it's very much a test. How much will we put up with? Well, if we'll tolerate that, then it's going to spread further and further and further. So I think it's very much part of Project 2025. I think it's very much about seizing control, wiping out states' rights, um, and centralizing power with the federal government, something that the founders were very much opposed to. And that's the reason they came up with 50 states with 50 local governments, was to prevent a centralization of power. And you're even seeing it now with Trump throwing out, we need to federalize elections. The same people who, when they were just trying to pass some voting protection rights said you can't do that. Each state gets to decide what they do. And yeah, so I think we're just seeing it. I mean, that was very alarming to me. And everyone's going, yeah, we should do that. No, 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 no. So, and and where they went in and the Fulton County, that raid in Fulton
Hmm.
County, the voting machines.
Hmm.
And then I guess they tried to do it somewhere else too, in Minnesota there, and or Michigan, sorry, Michigan. And yeah, I mean, no, this is not just isolated. This is a well choreographed, well planned, well, and it's going to be implemented everywhere if we allow this to stand. That's why it's so important to not let this stand, what's currently happening.
Hmm. And historically, who tends to lose their rights first
Uh,
when constitutional protections begin eroding, and how does the public usually realize it's happening?
well, I mean, it happens very much like it's happening now. Marginalized communities and minorities. So, people who are here illegally are very marginalized. And so it starts with immigrants and non-citizens. Then then it moves on to enemies of the state, political dissidents that they deem dangerous. Once again, just go back and read some lead up to Nazi Germany, and then the poor and the vulnerable. And we're starting to see a movement here that's very much like Nazi Germany, where they had the asocial program,
Mm,
where people who were homeless and poor were deemed less than, for lack of a better word, and they were also shipped off to camps and different things,
mm,
as were people with physical infirmities. Um, yeah. So yeah, just yeah. And then by that point in time, it's like the poem, and then there was no one left when they came for me, and then it's just too late. It's just by the time people realize there's a problem, it typically is too late.
mm,
Sadly, in a
mm,
historical context. And I guess a lot of us are just hoping that this time it will be different, but the odds aren't in our favor.
mm, mm. Well, once again, thank you so very much for joining us today and giving us your insights. Definitely always appreciate you.
Yeah, I wish it was more optimistic, but
It
but
is what it is, right?
I will say this, I am encouraged and optimistic that people are still showing up to protest.
Hmm.
So that is a good sign. Now, if more people need to join in, but yes. So I will leave you on that happy high note.
Okay. Well, for those of you who are just joining our conversation, please consider to like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.